I am so pleased to have you on today's webinar. You've been out there singing the Third Path tune since the very start. You really were part of the original thinkers about how we could do work differently so we have time for our lives. And as you said, where I'm taking the punchline away, you're doing your best work at age 73 because you've just learned and learned and learned all the way along. And you're really doing some exciting things to make the world a better place. Tell us a little bit about the work you've done all along, and tell us a little bit about Respectful Exits, which is the big focus of today's webinar. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thanks, and it's really great, and I've always admired your work, Jessica, and I'm really happy and honored to be with you today. I began, I did flexibility in a bunch of companies as startups for about 15 years, and I just thought that's how you did work. And then was recruited by New Ways to Work in San Francisco in 1986 to try and introduce flexibility into corporations. And Barney and Suzanne, who ran that organization, said, we want you to do this national thing. I said, well, don't companies just do this? It's a sensible thing to do. And they laughed. So for 6 years, we worked on advocacy, and they were brilliant women, pioneers of the field of workplace flexibility. And they put forward a menu, they published a book, and their menu of flexible work options became the standard. So it's the, things you're familiar with, flex time, work at home, compressed work weeks, and then they were always very interested in the creation of part-time work as the most supportive of people trying to integrate work and life. Well, of course, work at home has taken off and flex time's abundant, compressed has disappeared, and part-time job sharing, never. But the one option which I've come to call the orphan option was phased retirement. I began advocacy and consulting in '86. It was 21 years later, in 2007, that I had the first corporate client. I'd had 70 clients by then who wanted to do a phased retirement program.
Huh.
And they were the last client, and because then the recession hit, and nobody wanted any workers, or certainly older workers. So, I'm sort of like a dog with a bone, in their honor, and I want to make flexible and phased retirement as common as telework is now. There's no reason it shouldn't be. Obviously, it's another mountain to climb, but I'm young in spirit. So I've about 2 years ago decided to form Respectful Exits, with, obviously, as the name suggests, saying we have to stop this disrespectful discarding of people simply because they're old. We don't march whole groups of people out of a company because they're black or because they're women or because they're trans, whatever. This is a whole group of people that get summarily dismissed for no reason other than their age. It should be criminal. It's not, but it should stop. So we began an advocacy campaign with two prongs. One was to try and implement a set of corporate changes or employer practices, as we say, that will enable a longer career for people who need it and who are living long enough to take advantage of it. They need to get out of the 19th century and recognize that we're in a different world. At the same time, I'm ample proof that organizational change takes a very long time. So we also work directly, and we'll talk later about this, to empower and encourage employees to make these things happen. One quick footnote, when I went to New Ways to Work, there was literally no corporation in America offering any of these options. None.
Yeah.
But there were people doing these things. And the reason? Because very brave people made proposals to their employers that made business sense, and they got flex time, they got work from home, they got part-time. Many of them were women. Many of them were people with families. The same process will happen around phased retirement. It won't happen because companies suddenly get wise and farsighted. It'll happen because, from our lips to God's ears. But what we can count on is that people who need these things will lead the change. So we're encouraging that, and we continue to consult to companies that see the light and want to actually do something. And there has been a renewed interest in this whole thing, mostly because the labor markets are very tight. People are beginning to realize that they can't just discard older workers, and so we'll get into some of the whys and wherefores. So it's been very exciting. And I will just say this one thing: I've done a lot of crazy things in my life, and often, there's sort of a various informal focus groups, and there's always some group of people say, "What are you, nuts?" This is the only idea I have ever talked about now to literally hundreds and hundreds of people. No one has ever said anything about what a great idea.
Yeah.
Everybody understands the time has come to make this happen. So it's reassuring, and I look forward to talking further about the detail.
Yeah, no, it actually makes a heck of a lot of sense. And I mean, you're going to laugh when I put you in this box, but we've been looking at Anne-Marie Slaughter's different mandates for change, and I originally put Paul into the box of rediscovering the pursuit of happiness, with the idea that when we get to phased retirement, from Jessica's perspective of the world. What it really means is that people who've been practicing an integrated approach all their lives can start, they've raised their kids, they've, hopefully handled the elder care, and they now have some time to, really pursue some other things. My parents are great examples. My mom and dad, my dad's not with us anymore, but my mom and dad were great examples of people who really thought of excellent activities to live a very engaged life as aging people. And so phased retirement allows us to kind of think about, how do we keep our health up? How do we keep connected to people? So doing phased retirement just makes so much sense for us. We're living longer. It's just such a smart idea. I know back and forth with Paul when we were talking about this, he's a good reminder, though, that there's a lot of people where this is a serious problem, where people are being encouraged, or thrown out the door at 65, and then they have this very long gap where they need more income, need ways to stay engaged. It can be I see it as this is an incredible opportunity, but I think what you were motivated in part, Paul, was because this has become a really serious problem for so many people who have to leave the workforce earlier than they really need to. Is that a fair description?
I think it's absolutely right, and I think the one I've been inundated lately. People send me stuff all the time, and I've been getting all sorts of versions of the U-shaped happiness curve.
Yeah.
Hey, you're happy when you're younger, and then there's this trough, and then you get happy as you get older. Well, happy for some people as they get older. What's really happening now is that we're facing an imminent epidemic of devastating poverty among elders.
Yeah.
We're talking about people literally dying because they cannot afford food and medicine as they live to be 75 and 80. We have broken the dream, and I'll just say that this punchline earlier. Employers have engineered this process, not out of malice or bad intent, but incrementally they've eliminated pensions, they've kept wages flat, and people are paying the price. And we apply the basic Pottery Barn rule. If you broke it, you got to fix it. So it's up to it. Yes, we'll talk later. There's things the government can do, lots that people can do, but employers need to fix the problems they've created over the last 3 decades. And, otherwise, we are going to have to wrestle with a generation that cannot be rescued, and it's a terrifying thought.
It's a terrifying thought, and I wanted to start with that reality, that stark and true reality, and I then wanted to share the one, I think why I've been able to stay working in this field the way I've worked is because I also have some happy stories, so no big surprise, the Third Path community includes some pretty progressive leaders who are thinking differently, who have really practiced this idea of an integrated approach across their careers. And so, Paul, you've probably heard me talk about that. What we've seen is, these leaders that we've now known for, way too many years, they started out in this place where, they were flexing for themselves. But now we saw them go on and start supporting teams to be more flexible And then we've had some leaders who've moved into a more senior position, and they're helping their organizations think differently about this. And so one of the things we're going to circle back to is when you find progressive leaders who have practiced this idea of, I want to be successful at work, and I want to have time and energy for my life outside of work, I think they're going to be the ones who help us promote this change around phased retirement in their organizations. And I certainly have started to collect some great stories of leaders who, started taking care of their grandchildren a couple days a week as a way to be happy themselves, but also cut back at work. And then the super bonus point is, because they were cutting back at work, they were supporting others to play a bigger role at work. So exactly what Paul's talking about, this concept of phased retirement. So I think there is going to be some organizations that are more supportive, and it's probably because there's some leaders in those organizations who've done things differently all along. What do you think about that, Paul?
No, I think that's right, and I think I painted with a broad brush employer practices, but of course, there are variations both between employers and within. We've recognized some employers are doing some very innovative things, and there's always an underlying demand from employees for these things, but they come to fruition because some leadership within an organization acknowledges the need and responds, and that's how the whole flexibility change happened. It was bottoms up, but if you don't also enlist the support of leadership in the process, you don't get change. You just get frustration. So I think you're absolutely right, that's why we sort of pursue both sides of the equation. We're interested in mobilizing employees on their own behalf, but also really putting informing, educating, mobilizing, and pressuring employers to do the right thing. So.
Yep. Because the bottom line is, if we're thinking about a phased retirement, there's some flexibility required around how to have that person flex their works. Maybe there's a doctor's appointment or et cetera that they have to kind of be able to be flex around. But really, we're also talking about this idea of capacity management, that somebody maybe used to be working full time and now they're cutting back. They're reducing the amount of work that they're doing. And so what Paul's going to be getting into as we get into this webinar is how do we help people think smarter about this, capacity management if you're going to cut back at work. And what you're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening in today or if you're listening to the recording, is that Paul's got some great tools for you to really, this is practical stuff. You're going to see some really practical stuff around how to make some change around this. All right, so there's a lot of benefits for employees around phased retirement. Here's a great list that Paul provided for us. In fact, a bunch of the slides that you're going to be seeing are straight from Paul. He's been out there really getting the word out about this stuff. So thank you for sharing them with us. Any of the benefits in particular you want to talk about, or we could talk about all of them, Paul? Which benefits really stick out for you?
I think you can. I think the one that's actually the sleeper in here that's most important is the last one.
Mm-hmm.
There is now a growing body of research and very compelling research, some of which shows that basically the sudden termination of employment over time leads to death 4 years prior to that cohort of people who do not have that experience. It kills you when you get thrown out the door suddenly.
Yeah.
Why is it? Well, because our entire working lives and metabolism and everything else are organized around work. And one day, bam, you're out the door, maybe on the golf course, whatever. It's a terrifying experience, and it is can be a physically and mentally debilitating experience.
Yeah.
It's the thing people don't think about, because everybody has this notion, oh, I can't wait to retire.
Right.
Well, when you do and go from 80 to 0 in one day, it is a total shock to your system, and some people don't recover from it. So I think I think all the other obvious business benefits and payouts are there, but that's the one that I most has caught my attention as we've done this work.
Yeah, and again, back to the concept of phasing into retirement. Instead of going from 80 to 0, to phase into that retirement is such a smart way to avoid that problem. So you sent us a bunch of myths. I chose 5 of them for us to talk about. I thought this was a fun one to lead with. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Tell us more about that.
This is the most pernicious notion out there, which is, oh, old people just can't do technology. Well, pardon me, but nonsense. I'll put it simply. Here's my take. People are all agog about millennials and the digital natives and all that stuff. I talk to tons. I do consulting. I'm inside companies and have been for 30 years. I have discovered in the last couple of years the great disappointment that's being shown in companies at the inability of millennials to actually manage systems and people. The simple summary is they're digital natives. They're really great at taking an iPhone out of the box and getting it to work. But if it doesn't work, they're stumped. Well, what you need to do with technology in an organization is you have to have the skills to integrate systems into an organization. That means knowing how to work with teams, work with people. People who've been in a company for a long time have probably integrated everything from various forms of Word to Excel. They've gone through all kinds of iterations, teaching people how to, let go of an old system. And those techniques are infinitely stronger in seasoned workers than they are in new hires.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a completely wrong-headed notion of what tech is and what effective adaptation requires. And again, there's some very good research simply on the basic ability to comprehend a new technology and immediately put it to use, where older workers are just as good at it as younger. So it's the usual thing. Some are better than others, but it's all over the map.
Yeah. Well, I love that point about that. Really, learning a technology is only a piece of it. Getting people and the whole organization to adopt it, and the complexity of that is really another. It's a skill it's some wisdom that you get over time around how to do that better. So, great point about that myth. What about this one that, hey, they're just expensive. I can't keep them around. They're expensive. Tell us more about that one.
Well, you can read this, and this is my favorite, that older workers actually have half the turnover rate of new hires.
Yes.
So all the replacement costs, rehiring, they're infinitely cheaper in that regard. They also have better attendance levels and use far fewer sick days than younger workers.
Yeah.
But basically, this is the kind of thing that only narrow-minded accountants, who will look at and say, well, gee, you cost more per hour than this person. Well, if that's your only metric for value and contribution, you ought to really do something else, because there are many aspects of value in an employee, and discounting experience, knowledge, and things. It's stunning. I'll just give a quick example. I consulted to a company that had just laid off their entire everybody who was 52 and older who was a regional sales manager. They just got rid of. They lost three decades of extraordinary customer knowledge, competitive intelligence, and whatever. They had no idea they didn't know it existed. They didn't know they lost it, and they are now foundering without it. Because they thought, oh, well, Joe's really pretty expensive. I think we should get rid of him and replace him with somebody younger and cheaper. Dumb. Just dumb.
Dumb on so many levels, including the fact that, as you've been talking about, phased retirement means that you can say to this group of people, we're going to get into the politics of this a little bit later, because we realize not every organization is super supportive of these things. But, in the ideal organization, what you do is you say to somebody who wants to reduce their hours but has all this wisdom, hey, this is a win-win. We get to have you working 3 days a week, and we get to still have access to your wisdom, and you're helping us transfer that knowledge to somebody else. This is a real win-win. So wonderful. All right, so they're risky. They're difficult. This phased retirement, man, it's just too hard.
This is, it's a testament to my long patience and tolerance. This is the same silly arguments I heard in 1986 about we couldn't let people work from home because they'll be doing the laundry and watching Oprah. It's new. It's a challenge to traditional control, and so people are scared of it. and therefore you invent all kinds of ostensible reasons. The Government Accountability Office did a wonderful report on phased retirement, identifying 9 exemplary companies that had great programs. Not a single one of those companies ever encountered any of the commonly put out problems with pensions, with taxing. It's all myth. It's all nonsense. It's an excuse for inaction. It's not a practical challenge. And so as I say, this is the one that most tries my patience in conversations with executives. But I try to keep.
Do you know offhand where if someone wanted to look at that government report, anything comes quick?
It's on our Respectful Exits website. It's the GAO report, and it's also, you can go to GAO phased retirement. Just Google it, and it has an excellent one or two page summary, and then it's a really fascinating text. Because they're a government, they don't. When they do a study, they don't make private sector recommendations, so they don't tell companies what to do, but it's implicit that they're telling companies what to do.
That's great. That's great. Wonderful. All right, so I'm glad you can find it on your website too. That sounds great.
Yep.
Hey, this is the one we started with, which is the whole point that there's a serious problem here around most people being able to afford a very long period of time between 65 and, what is the average lifespan now? So, tell us more about, this gap around how we can make, how phased retirement will help address this problem.
Well, essentially, we have a new website. We're in development, which will be up soon, and in it we take for 50 years, financial counselors use the image of the 3-legged stool for retirement: strong pension, personal savings, and Social Security. Social Security was supposed to be the minor leg and the supplement. In the last 30 years, private sector pensions have virtually disappeared. So they've been replaced by 401ks. 401ks are massively underfunded. They don't replace pensions. Savings, because wages have been flat for 30 years, people don't have the ability to save. I think we don't have the statistic here, but half of Americans cannot afford a $400 emergency.
Wow.
They do not have access to $400 in cash for a broken car, a broken leg, whatever. So people are literally, if you watch during the federal government shutdown, federal workers were going to food banks because they couldn't make it through the month without somebody feeding them. So people are on the edge. So part of the whole notion of phased retirement is by extending, and we talk about extended work and flexible and phased retirement. You've been using, Jessica, and I understand the notion of 65. Most people get retired before that. Generally, people start getting pushed out in their 50s.
Oh, wow.
And so you're looking at, and there's a study recently, 90% of the people who are laid off between their 55th and 60th year, if they get a second job, never get up to half of their previous income in their former job. And so the idea of extending work in your existing workplace enables you basically to earn more longer, to contribute more to your 401k, to potentially increase your personal savings, and to help repair some of the broken legs on that 3-legged stool.
Yeah.
And this, if you don't do that, then as you can see here, you're looking at people trying to live on $2,500 a month or $30,000 a year. There are places where you can't rent an apartment for $30,000 a year. So we are on the cusp of significant poverty event.
Really honestly, Paul, as I listen to you, the words that come to mind is thank you for doing the work that you're doing, because it's really, really, really important. So thank you for doing this work. So, all right, myth number 5. Tell us about this.
Well, this is, again, there's sort of this notion out there that somehow Social Security should be, and that's an ongoing battle to get rid of it or increase it. Nobody's talking about increasing it. But somehow the government didn't create this problem. Employers created this problem. They need to fix it. The solution is in the source. And, most people writing and talking about almost nobody ever holds companies to account. I'll give you my favorite recent example. Jamie Dimon, the chairman of Chase, one of the largest banks in the country, they just made $31 billion in profit last year and $4 billion additional dollars off the tax cut. And he was talking about what they're doing with that money, and that they've made a one-time small contribution to 401ks. For people at the lower end of their wage scale, they gave each of them $750 to their 401k.
Wow.
I would be publicly embarrassed and shamed to say it, to put it in print in a letter to your shareholders.
Yeah.
It's unconscionable. And the fact that he could say that and nothing was said, and no one thinks, oh, gee, Jamie, maybe you could have put in like 20 grand. You know, it would be what my Disney client used to call decimal dust. Yeah. So, you know, it's time to focus on the source of the problem. You know, you know, it's the old line, you know, why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. You know, if you want to solve this problem, you gotta go to the employers who benefited enormously from the degradation of retirement and say, "Oops, time to reverse course."
And by the way, you know, the whole point is it really is good for organizations. You've got a nice history here, Paul, so we can see that getting more flexible workplaces created a really better work environment for men and women to be able to manage their lives over the course of their careers, where, you know, they have children, they have aging parents, they have other responsibilities. So it was good for the workplace to retain smart, talented people. Well, there's a long list of benefits for organizations that want to do this. So I think you're so right. We need to hold organizations accountable. And we also get to say to them, this is a win for you too. So tell us about some of the ways that we win, the organizations win.
Well, I'd use the example. I said that it wasn't until 2007 I had a client that embraced phased retirement. It was a biotech called AbbVie outside of Chicago. They were facing the loss of sort of core scientists well, to give you the idea, but they had this bunch of people who they were going to lose and who were the key to their next generation of discovery. And so we worked with them to develop a very sensible phased retirement program, which delivered all this stuff. People who were going to take a package and leave stayed on average 2 to 3 years longer. They didn't lose anybody that they wanted to keep. They were able to hold on to their knowledge. And we, as part of the process, we designed in 2 interesting things. One, based on some focus groups, they reduced their schedules from 100% to 80%, but they paid them full pay. Mm-hmm. They didn't do a pay cut, and full benefits. And we did and managers were, well, geez, you know, these people are going to, you know, they're going to work 80% time. They're not going to give us their best work. So we had some focus groups with the employees and said, I gave them a piece of paper and a pen. I said, would you guys, there were 12 of them, I said, would you please write to me the 20% of your job that you could stop doing tomorrow and nobody would notice? It would have no negative impact on the business. Yep. And there was this kind of silence. And then this one guy raised his hand and he said, you only want 20%? I said, well, yeah, let's start there. Yeah. Well, in fact, they redesigned their jobs to deliver higher value so it ended up being more cost effective. And secondly, there were very specific plans for knowledge transfer. So they they mentored the younger generation very systematically. It's been an incredibly successful program. It's gone on for 10 years. They've had enormous benefits. It's part of the culture at this point. And you know, so I think any organization that takes that kind of approach can have these kind of results.
Yeah. And again, for you and me, it's a no-brainer. I can't believe what time it is. We're gonna have to jump through a couple more slides. The big message. No. You've got great stories, lots of history here that we can draw from. The big message is that unfortunately there's a lot of workplaces that don't really support reduced hours work. So you've got this 2-pronged approach of kind of educating companies and the population about this issue. But unfortunately there's a bunch of organizations out there that kind of reward people who put work first. We've been talking about it all year long. So anybody who sets boundaries, whether that's to have time to care for their kids or an aging parent or to phase into retirement in these work first work cultures, it's not going to be so easy to do that. So in the resources, the second prong of the stuff that you offer, you encourage people to go ahead and think about how to go and do this, even in a less supportive workplace. And what I thought was so interesting is when I put up the website about where people can go to and learn more about how they can make some of these changes, you have a warning that actually encourages people to think a little bit about that, when you raise your hand that you might want to make this change, think about what this could mean for you. We are going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can go ahead and the resources you have called the phaser, where people can kind of go and actually literally go to this website. I totally encourage it. Find out more about how you can start implementing some of these ideas of doing a phased retirement. We're going to go into the specifics about a couple of them. But tell us a little more about that warning. You've got some good resources, but why is there a warning?
Well, we wanted to be careful that people didn't just think this was like asking for work at home, which is an accepted proposition, and that could happen. And we wanted people to think about how we provide all the tools to make a compelling case around knowledge transfer and work redesign, but we make some suggestions about how to reduce the risk. One is that you don't have to do this by yourselves. We encourage the formation of what we call longevity forums, which are groups of aging workers who get together and become sort of a mutual support group. Don't go into your boss with one phase retirement program. Go into a division with 8 people asking for it. Mm-hmm. It's much harder to say no to a group than it is to one person, and it's much harder to retaliate against the group. One of the things that I would just say about this, that's really the most sensitive matter in corporations is the risk of being accused and convicted of age discrimination. Mm-hmm. Corporate counsels are more afraid of that than anything. One personally said to me, off the record, I won't name him, but he said, we get all kinds of discrimination suits all the time, and we always win. We always settle. Our greatest fear, we don't ever want to end up in court with a jury of 65-year-old people who've been screwed in various employers and having them judge our age discrimination case. We'll never go there. So they're very, very sensitive. So one of the things that happens when you make a proposal like this, yes, there's risk, but there's risk for them as well. A dilemma for a manager is, I'm going to turn this down. Is that an act of age discrimination? Gotcha. I'm going to say yes to you, but I'm not going to say yes to her. Is that age discrimination? So you actually have some interesting leverage on your side, but you should also cover your flanks by doing proposals with other people. And testing the waters. I mean, you can get an informal sense of, and again, this has to do, you mentioned earlier, if you went to one of your advanced leaders with one of these proposals, they'd probably be very inclined to consider it, at least on a trial basis. Yep. You go to somebody who has a history of refusing everything reasonable anybody requested. Well, get a transfer and hope you get a better manager. Yeah. So you have to be politically sensitive to your environment.
Yes, absolutely. So all that wisdom we've learned around flexibility throughout our integrated careers, we've got to apply again as we think about phased retirement. But I want to emphasize that there really are some great tools at this Phaser website. We are running short on time, but you had some great idea about very concrete information about how to think about proposing this idea, and then you even have this. You have a great section on persuading and addressing some of the fears that people might have. I mean, really, folks, check it out. There's some really great concrete information that you can get from the phaser.org website, where they've really given you some great tools to work with. I want to make sure we get a chance to hear a real live story of somebody who's put this into action in a second, but there might be one other thought you have for people about what you've been learning around this, either around why an organization maybe wants to make change, or maybe for a person, what they should be thinking about. Any last thoughts, Paul?
I think the critical thing here is that part of the overall process of devaluing older workers is that we internalize that lower valuation, and so we're reluctant to act on our own behalf. The change here will happen just as it did with flex time and work from home and the rest. When people take the issue into their own hands and say, no, I've contributed to my organization for 20, 30 years. I deserve the extended work and the flexible path to retirement. And I'm going to ask for it. I'm going to get together like-minded people, and we're going to make this happen. I think passivity on the part of aging workers is almost a greater danger than resistance on the part of skeptical employers. So I would really encourage people to, assess your value, assess your contribution, and make a reasonable business-based request for why what you're proposing is a better path to the future than the one you're currently looking at. And I think that's the best we can do.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And there's just some really great shining examples out there of, for example, bringing in accountants around the seasonality of work so that, you can bring in some expertise at your busiest periods. There's just so many win-wins that could happen around here. So again, thank you for this important work. And we're definitely going to be able to hear from Paul again in our live Q&A at the very end of today's webinar. But I did want to give you guys a real concrete example of someone who's put these ideas into action. You might remember that all year long, we are including people from our integrated life advocate community. Those are career counselors, couples counselors, work-life coaches, in this case, a work-life practitioner, who are part of our community helping others make change. So Barbara, I am so glad you're here today, and you've got a pretty cool phasing into retirement story. Tell us about it, or you might want to say something about that you've heard Paul and I talk about to start with.
Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Jessica. I do want to emphasize that slide that Paul had up about the deliverables around phased retirement. I absolutely agree, and there is much research and data out there around that, and they are so critical to use in making your proposals and your arguments. The other point I wanted to address, and then that'll lead into my story, is the point that was on the benefits slide at the beginning of Paul's presentation around health risk and early death. And so I like to also think of the three-legged stool, not only for affording retirement, so the financial components that Paul addressed, but what are those legs that go into well-being in retirement? So financial obviously is critical, and that would be one leg, but also physical. Where am I going to live? How am I going to live my life? How am I going to take care of my health? And then thirdly, and so critical for that well-being and health, are our social emotional health. How are we going to deal with no longer having a ready-made cohort of acquaintances and friends in the workplace? The routine that Paul mentioned, when you don't have to hit the ground running in the morning and you have so many options because you have free time, it can be overwhelming and can even be paralyzing. So thinking about all of those things, and I was in the last third of my 28-year career at the University of California, Davis. I was the manager of work, life, and wellness. So I had both the good fortune and I felt the obligation to test all of these things out, push the agenda for our employees at the university, and be a role model. So one of the things that we did at the university, and I would encourage workplaces, organizations to do, is a transition to retirement program. It was called The Next Chapter. Any staff, faculty member who was within 5 years of retirement age, and that was as defined by the university's pension and retirement plan, was eligible to attend these classes. And there would be a variety of benefits counselors, employee and assistance program professionals. We had a program in work life, so that over a course of either a full day or several part days, people who were considering retirement could think of those pieces of the three-legged stool and how they could begin not only phasing out their work in the workplace, but making those transitions to being someone whose identity was not first and foremost as a worker, as an employee, but someone who was going to have a new life and what that life might be shaped like. And starting with your personal values, what is important, what do you want to be known for, how do you want to leave your mark in the world, and then making your decisions based on and guided by those values. So quickly on the personal specifics of my story, the University of California has a program known as the Employee Reduction in Time Program. It's a voluntary program. It does require departmental approval. There are some issues if you are represented by a labor union, of which we had, I believe, over 14 in the University of California system, and needed to work within your bargaining agreement. But none of those were insurmountable if you were determined. And one of the things we did in the work-life office was to provide the coaching to support that progress. So, and the reason the ARET program was introduced was to save money for the University of California, especially at the time when California was in its horrible budget crisis. So it really was put out there as, it was honest that we need to save money as a university, but here is a way to do some of that part-time work even. So it was not specifically tied to phased retirement. It was for any staff person, you could reduce between 5 and 50%. One incredible benefit was that you continued to accrue your vacation and sick leave time at your pre-ARET rates. So if you were a full-time employee and reduced your time, so I personally dropped my time 25%, so that I could work 4 days a week and have a day off. I still accrued my time for vacation and sick leave into those banks at 100%. So that was a real perk for employees. I also used flex policies that we had in place because about 5-7 years ago, I discovered the practice of Reiki, which is a Japanese practice of energy medicine, which was incredibly important to my personal well-being. And little did I know that I would be drawn to it as a professional practitioner and want to, and ultimately ended up setting up my own practice, which I saw as a potential continued source of revenue, gratification, fulfillment, and purpose when I left the university. So I wanted to be able to work on that and build that up, which I did on that 1 day off per week. We have 4 grandchildren. That is not one of them in the picture there. That is actually a photo taken at one of the child development centers on our campus, and that was our director's son. But I do have 4 grandchildren. They moved out of state to Iowa when there were 3 grandchildren, and when my daughter announced she was pregnant the 4th time and they were living away from family and friends, my husband and I looked at each other and knew that was the instantaneous decision. We really needed to speed up our retirement plans and relocate. But what was that going to be like to live away from a place we had raised our own children, developed our careers, been in our house for 30 plus years, moving from Northern California to central Iowa, which has actually turned out to be the best thing ever. But we needed to experiment with that. So when we knew we would be coming, we bought a home here. And I set up a plan to work remotely 1 day per month for the final year of my work at UC Davis, so that I could actually be in Iowa, see what the weather was like, the lifestyle was like, be with my grandchildren in the evenings when I wasn't working. And then thirdly, I had been in my position as manager for about 12 years. Our department had weathered some significant staffing reductions with the up and downs of the economy, and at a university, teaching and research have to be first and foremost. So funds really shifted away from administrative staffing and positions and programs, obviously so, into the key mission of the university. So we had to figure out what was going to happen when I left and the brain drain occurred. And there was going to have to take time to reconsider that position, do the whole interview process, which in a university takes an immense amount of time. I had a phenomenal lead coordinator who was willing and interested in absorbing everything my brain had to spill out to her. And so we made a succession plan that she would become the interim manager. And we very much focused for 2 years on making her the shadow with me at every meeting, contract conversation, project planning and design, so that she was ready to take over. And then in the final year, as Paul addressed, you focus on the high value work. I solely took myself out of a lot of the transactional day-to-day operations and focused on wrapping up our critical projects and contracts. And I was also personally passionate. I wanted to leave the university and my career as nicely packaged with a bow on it and be able to hand it over to this successor interim manager, so she had as much smooth sailing as possible. As of course, new projects would be coming on that she would have to address once I was gone. So
right.
For me, I feel incredibly fortunate that I was in a position with an institution that was willing to offer these kinds of benefits, but also experiment with me a little bit and be supportive, and that I got to really develop a plan, not only for how was I going to transition from being a worker, being a mother and a grandparent, being involved in my community, but also how was I going to take care of myself once all of that infrastructure that was so critical and life affirming kind of shifted away.
Yeah. Wow. So Barbara, there's just so much to underscore. And of course, time has floated away faster than we can imagine. But I just want to, so what you're hearing in Barbara's story is done well. There is such a gift to the organization, to Barbara, to, Barbara's children and the grandchildren she's involved with, to her developing her whole self in this new way as a master Reiki practitioner. So phased retirement really can be this gift for us to just think in such a different way. And no surprise that Barbara did it so well, because as we've been sharing all year long, she followed a process all the way through her career of constantly thinking in an integrated way, pausing, reflecting, what's coming next? What's important to me at work and outside of work? Step number 2, really getting clear about where are you going, what's important to you outside of work. Then looking for those answers at work where you can do work well, create time for these other things that you want to do. That's the second of the triple win. And that's good for your colleagues and clients. So she really got smart about how to transfer this work, transfer her knowledge onto the next person as she was getting ready to leave. And she kept on experimenting, literally taking herself to the next place she was going to be living in, trying it out, seeing if it was going to work. Just so many great things, skills she learned all the way through her career around how to follow an integrated approach. I had a slide that we're just not going to have time to talk about. This could be something we can talk about in our Q&A. Obviously, there's going to be some challenges. Interestingly, sometimes two parents or the people who are retiring see it differently about how they want to retire. That's a whole thing around how do couples negotiate this, and we actually have a really great webinar and some information about that we can talk more about. What do you do when you have an unsupportive manager? When you're hitting barriers, we can get to a place where we have doubt and hopelessness. So there are some challenges we might face around this issue, and we're going to talk about them in our Q&A. And maybe we'll, Paul and Barbara can share how to overcome some of those challenges or examples of challenges when people ask those questions in the live Q&A. So where have we been? We've learned a lot about this important idea of phased retirement. It's good for us, good for society. Paul's really made a big case around that. Barbara's shown us how powerful it can be for ourselves, our families, our organizations, and that there's going to be a bunch of different ways that we all implement this into our lives. But such an important concept today. So I'm rushing us along. I want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us. We've got some great resources on our website. I hope you'll check them out. And in a minute, we're going to start our live Q&A. So maybe there's a last word you want to share. Barbara, one quick sentence, one last word you want to share, and then Paul, I'll give you the very last word, and then we'll end the webinar for today. But stick around for the live Q&A if you're on live today. Barbara, a last thought about this important subject today.
Keep your eye on the prize, even through the hopelessness. There are ways.
Yeah. And certainly if you don't have a supportive manager, find that supportive manager, because Barbara's story really shows you that there's a real win for everybody if you can do it well. Paul, any last thoughts that you want to share with us about this very important topic? You might be on mute, Paul.
I think it's very important to place this in a sort of world historical context. Mm-hmm. The workplace change and a shift from full-time to part-time work is the trend of the future, and this is an integral part of that. I just end with two very smart guys, Sergey Brin, a founder of Google, Carlos Slim, a Mexican equivalent, founder of the cell phone king, both spoke in 2014. Forget all the future of work technology nonsense you're hearing. The great organizational challenge in the next 3 decades is for companies to learn there is not enough work to go around. We have to learn to transition from full-time to part-time work as the standard. That is where we're headed. And our systems are outdated, unable to comprehend that, but they both said, forget the rest of the noise and the chatter, robots, it's all about changing. There will be enough wealth, there will be enough work and enough people that we can rethink and reimagine what a work week looks like. So I think we're a part of that trend, and I think, as I say, history is on our side.
Wow, that is a great context to think about. Hey, thanks again, everybody, and stick around if you're on today's live live webinar. Stick around for the live Q&A. Thanks, you two. That was wonderful.